Good evening, everyone. I know most of you signed in expecting to see a lot of feedback.
Hold on.
Everybody,
It's me.
everybody mute, please. Good. Yeah, I know you signed in tonight expecting to see Wendy, but you've got me tonight. Wendy, fortunately, is spending in-person time with her sons. They came to town today. They're only going to be in town for 24 hours. So she has assigned me as host tonight. And with the help of John Abbott, we're going to try and make sure that the program goes forward as it should. So I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll start out with the first 15, which I'm doing tonight, and it's on a program called The Black Book. So let me get that set up and going here. Okay. There we go. All right. The Black Book was a short-lived series of 15-minute programs broadcast over CBS beginning in the spring of 1952. It was the creation of the successful team of Norman Macdonald and John Meston. And Macdonald and Meston, of course, are best known for their successful collaboration on radio's adult westerns, Gunsmoke and Fort Laramie. For the Black Book, Meston adopted the stories of other writers and Macdonald directed. The shows had two primary themes, mystery and murder. Someone trying to commit the perfect murder or someone trying to escape from detection and punishment. The program was primarily designed as a vehicle for Paul Frees, who was referred to as the man of 1,000 voices. Although we know from one of the quizzes and some comments I made before, he didn't do a very good job substituting for Howard McNair as Doc Adams on Gunsmoke. But Frees was the teller of tales, revealing a story from his giant collection of stories. Frees also had the title Teller of Tales on a program called The Man in Black. Audition tapes of that show exist, but it apparently never aired under that title. When the Teller of Tales was heard on the air, it was in the program The Black Book. Frees played multiple roles on the show. It was said that he could have played all the parts, much as Jack Webb did on the program 1 out of 7 that Jack French played for us a few months back. Frees did not, however, play all the parts. Veteran actor John Daner contributed male roles. Virginia Gregg, prolific radio actress that she was, contributed female roles. And of course, Daner and Gregg were stalwarts on CBS, and had performed together many times. And of course, Meston and Macdonald were CBS people. So here we are with a click. The next time we're going to hear The Black Book.
I have another story to tell you today. This one is about a crime in which a murderer is trapped by one of the most powerful forces of nature. Do you want to hear it?
Now starring Paul Frees as your teller of tales. Another story from The Black Book.
Yes. From the world's most fabulous collection of strange and unusual stories, The Black Book, I have selected a story called The Vagabond Murder. Eric Patterson was growing desperate. He'd been there for over 2 hours, waiting waiting with less and less patience for the door in front of him to open. He listened intently for the warning sound of the key in the door. Eric needed to be warned because when the man he was waiting for entered the room, Eric was going to kill him. As the seconds ticked past in the darkness, Eric thought back to the beginning of all this. It was in New York. He had taken his wife, Karen, along on a business trip. It had been quite successful, and one of the best contacts he'd made was Henry Drucker. Drucker, the richest, most influential man in the whole investment business. And he seemed to like Eric from the start. And with Karen, they made a gay trio the last few days. Rounds of cocktail parties, the theater, endless nightclubs. And then on the last evening of all, Drucker had said,
"Look, Eric, why not join me on the Bermuda trip? The best thing in the world for you and Karen. My yacht sails tomorrow. What do you say?"
At first, Eric thought it was just talk, but he was wrong. And the next day, they sailed for Bermuda on Drucker's yacht, the Vagabond. It wasn't until the return trip that Eric began to suspect that it wasn't him Drucker was really interested in, but Karen. And then the night before they were to dock in New York, it happened. The three of them were sitting at the small bar after dinner when Karen got up, said she wanted some fresh air, and went out on deck. A few minutes later, Drucker excused himself.
"I think I'll go to my cabin, Eric. But I won't be long. Wait here for me, will you?"
Well, yes, if you like.
"Good. Then we'll have a nightcap together."
And so Eric was left alone. As he sat there, disturbing images began to form in Eric's mind. Pictures of Drucker, handsome, virile, wealthy, and of Karen, young, beautiful, and oh so impressionable. With a suddenness that overturned the bar stool, Eric was on his feet, and half running, he crossed the room and went down the corridor to Drucker's stateroom. Drucker, open the door. Drucker, do you hear me? Open this door, I'll break it down.
Just a minute, Eric. I'll be right there. Just take it easy.
I'll take it easy till I count to 5, then I'm coming in. 1, 2...
All right, Eric.
Where's she? Where's my wife?
Well, you must be drunk, Eric. Karen isn't in here.
Was she in here, Drucker? Tell me the truth.
Don't be a fool, Eric. Of course she wasn't.
Then why was your door... I guess I have made a fool of myself. I'm sorry, Drucker.
Forget it. I'll tell you why I locked the door. You see, Eric, I'm diabetic and have to give myself an insulin shot about this time every night. Naturally, I don't talk about it, nor do I like anyone barging in while I'm at it.
Eric stood there feeling like a fool while Drucker washed the hypodermic needle and put it away in a box. Eric watched him place the box next to a packet of insulin capsules in the drawer of the night table by his bunk.
I can understand your jealousy, old man, with a wife as lovely as Karen. But I know women, Eric, and Karen is in love with you. She always will be.
Look, I'm terribly sorry about this, Drucker.
Oh, now, let's just forget all about it. Matter of fact, I've been wanting to talk to you about something I've already told Karen. It should prove how I feel about you, Eric. Here, pour yourself a drink.
Thanks, I need it.
You know anything about uranium?
Well, it's expensive.
Know anything about Peru?
What are you driving at?
Uranium in Peru, Eric. Big. Really big. And the payoff is so big that I was going to put in $750,000 on my own. But I'll let you have $250,000 of it if you want it.
That's a lot of money.
So is a return of 23%.
Yeah. But I haven't got that much. I'd have to borrow on everything.
180 days should see the first dividends.
You'll have a certified check within 2 weeks. Back in New York, Eric and Drucker spent hours poring over graphs, reports, charts, surveys to make certain their investment was sound, and they could find no flaw. But 6 months later, Eric learned that even the most gilt-edged promotion can fail. Uranium in Peru didn't make him a millionaire. It ruined him. It took his entire personal fortune. And because he'd borrowed so heavily, his business and his credit were ruined. Eric suddenly found himself without a single capital asset. In desperation, he went to see Drucker.
So that's the picture, Eric. There isn't a thing I can do.
Yes, of course, I understand your position.
All my cash assets went too, and everything else of mine's tied up. You can't touch it for years.
Well, we took a chance, and we both lost. Thanks again, Drucker.
Eric, do you have any plans?
Well, I've had an offer from the coast.
Oh.
Small investment house in Oakland.
Well, I'm sure it'll work out fine. Tell me about Karen. How is she taking all this?
Karen? Oh, she's really great, Drucker. Now she decided to go back to modeling in New York for 6 months or so. Just while I'm getting started, you understand.
She's a fine girl, Eric. You're very lucky.
Yes, I know I am. Well, goodbye, and thanks again. Out in California, Eric thought often of Drucker. After all, it was part of the game. They'd missed this time, but maybe the next. More often, however, he thought about Karen in New York. He'd heard from her regularly at first, and then the letters stopped. For 6 weeks, he heard nothing. He phoned long distance again and again, but nothing was able to find her. And he was beginning to be beside himself with worry and fear. Then one night, his phone rang. Yes, hello?
Mr. Patterson?
Yes?
This is Oliver Fay. I do a little gossip column here for the Herald. I hope you read me.
No, I don't.
Well, anyway, perhaps you'd like to make a statement.
Statement? What are you talking about?
Well, it's about the marriage of Karen, your perfectly lovely ex-wife, and Henry Drucker.
Where'd you hear this?
I never reveal my sources, Mr. Patterson, but they're driving Mr. Drucker's Nash Healy out from Reno tomorrow. They'll be married aboard the Vagabond. Oh, it'll be terribly romantic, sailing off to the 7 seas in search of happiness, nursing their newfound love under the Southern Cross.
At first, Eric thought it was all a lie, that perhaps he was the victim of a cruel prank. But he had to find out. And an hour later, he was standing on a fog-wet pier looking at the sleek white outline of the Vagabond. And suddenly, as waves of nausea swept through him, he understood everything. Drucker had deliberately ruined him, and undoubtedly with Karen's knowledge. These last 6 weeks, Karen had been in Reno divorcing him by default. Everything had been taken from him. His money, his wife, his pride, and he hated them for it. Eric stood there raging, his eyes fixed on the porthole he knew to be that of Drucker's own cabin. And suddenly he realized that he was going to kill Drucker. And a second later, he knew how he was going to kill him. He returned to his rooms and dialed the number of the Herald, asking for Oliver Fay.
Fay speaking.
Mr. Fay, this is Eric Patterson.
Oh, yes.
Look, I want to apologize for my rudeness earlier this evening.
Oh, that's all right, Mr. Patterson. People are often harsh.
Yes, well, I'm sorry. I would like to give you a statement now. It's simply that Henry Drucker and I are close friends, and, well, there's no ill feeling between any of us. You understand. I certainly wish them the best of everything.
Well, good. I'll print that, and I'll show it to them tomorrow night. And you know, there's a pre-wedding party aboard the Vagabond.
Oh? What time are they sailing? I might want to send them a wire.
Well, I have my little notes right here. Let me see now. Cocktails at 5:30, then dinner at about 8, and finally the sailing around 2 a.m., I think. You know, it's going to be such fun. I'm the only one of the literary crowd they've included.
Oliver Fay gushed on, but Eric wasn't listening now. He had all the information he needed. Henry Drucker was as good as dead right now. About 6:30 next evening, Eric stood in the shadows of the pier and watched the last of the guests arrive and board the Vagabond. Then he walked quickly across the open area directly to the porthole of Drucker's cabin. He was unobserved. The porthole was on a level with the pier, and Eric had to lie on his stomach in order to crawl through it. A moment later, he was safely inside. He closed the porthole and waited for his eyes to become accustomed to the darkness. Then he found the night table by Drucker's bunk and removed the hypodermic needle and insulin. Quickly, he filled the syringe with more than enough insulin to kill a man and placed it carefully on top of the table. Next, he found a towel and rolled it lengthwise. With it, he could choke Drucker into unconsciousness without leaving a mark. Now he was ready. An hour passed, then 2, and a third, more slowly than ever. And for the first time, Eric grew nervous. Another hour, and the towel in his hands was wet with perspiration. What had happened? Had Drucker, in the excitement of the evening, forgotten his injection? Panic began to rise in Eric, and he fought it back desperately. And then suddenly he heard a key in the door. He stood back and waited. The door opened, and Drucker, a black figure against the light of the corridor, entered the cabin. Eric waited until he'd locked the door behind him. Then he moved. The towel went around Drucker's neck, and Eric twisted it with a frenzied strength. After a moment or two, Drucker ceased to struggle, and Eric finally released him. He might have been dead already, but to be sure and to make it look like suicide or an accident, he injected the overdose of insulin. Then it was over. Perfect. Eric sighed deeply with relief and satisfaction.
Mr. Drucker? Mr. Drucker? Oh, come now, I know you're in there. You promised me an interview, you know.
Terror-stricken Eric moved to the porthole. His hands trembled as he opened it and prepared to climb through. But something was wrong. The porthole was open, but he couldn't get out. Blocking it 6 inches from his hands was a solid wall of pilings, great timbers side by side. The floor of the pier was now 2 feet above him. For a moment he was dazed. And then he knew. The tide. The tide was going out, and the ship had dropped a few feet with it. The tide had cut off Eric's only escape. He was hopelessly trapped. He sat down heavily, almost ready to cry.
I'm still here, Mr. Drucker, and I'll wait right here all night if necessary. Do you hear me?
The Black Book stars Paul Frees as your teller of tales, assisted today by the noted Hollywood actor John Dehner. The Vagabond Murder was written by Norman Macdonald and John Meston and directed by Mr. Macdonald. The special music is composed and conducted by Leith Stevens. Every Monday night, a top Hollywood star plays the leading role in a thrill-packed story on suspense on most of these same CBS radio stations. Clarence Cassell speaking. Remember, Broadway Playhouse brings you top stars and top stories Sunday nights on the CBS Radio Network.
Okay, so let me find myself here and let's see which one this is here. Yep. Okay. All right, well, I'll just speak for now until I can find where I am. But that is the Black Book. Paul Frees went on to do a lot of cartoon work, certainly well known for playing Boris Badenoff on Rocky and Bullwinkle and then on Bullwinkle. And I was surprised to learn that he was also the Pillsbury Doughboy. So, Paul Frees had quite a career. All right, well, now that takes us to our quiz. And Sally, you're already co-host, so when you're ready, unmute and we're ready to have you go.
All right. Got my quiz here, which this month Jack promises us it's called the Rainbow Easy Peasy Quiz. So he says that I will have a difficult time reading it, which you know, I do not read it ahead of time. And he also says that we should get high scores, which means if you didn't do your studying, then you should still be able to pass this quiz, which is good because school is officially back in session now. So today was the first day officially of me being back at school. So I will let you all have 5 seconds to get your pencils and your pens and papers out. Ready, go. If you're not ready, that's on you. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Can I get a thumbs up that you can see the poll? Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, class. So we are now going to move right into our quiz. If I can find my pen. You may answer the questions on the poll and move faster than I will be speaking. I will read the questions twice. I may or may not read the answers twice, usually not, but it's mostly because I usually can't get through all the answers without losing it. So we'll see how we did today, Jack. I see you hiding behind your screen there, Jack. We'll see. All right, so here we go. Number 1. A distant relative of the Lone Ranger, who also fought crime, opened his program with the theme from Flight of the Bumblebee. He was A. The Green Hornet, B. The Red-Headed Woodpecker, C. The Beige Butterfly, D. The Ruby-Throated Hummingbird. A distant relative of the Lone Ranger, who also fought crime, opened his program with the theme from Flight of the Bumblebee. Who was it? That ruby-throated hummingbird, such an amazing superhero. Pollinators unite. Tough crowd. Number 2. In the comic strip and on radio, Little Beaver was the sidekick of which famous cowboy? A. Red Rider, B. Green Gunslinger, C. Blue Bronkbuster, D. Chartreuse Cowpoke. In the comic strip and on radio, Little Beaver was the sidekick of which famous cowboy? Number 3. Cato drove the powerful automobile of his crime-fighting boss. The car was called A. Black Beauty, B. Silver Sedan, C. Jade Jalopy, D. Copper Convertible. I think I'm going to rename my car. Cato drove the powerful automobile of his crime-fighting boss. What was the car called? Number 4. Bobby Benson and Straight Arrow both rode a Palomino. What color were their stallions? A. Golden, B. dapple gray. C, tickled pink. D, plaid. Bobby Benson and Straight Arrow both rode a Palomino horse. What color were their stallions? Horses. Maybe if it was My Little Pony, they'd be tickled pink.
Oh. Oh.
Number 5. A friend to those who had no friend on radio. This crime solver's first name was a U.S. metropolitan city. A, Boston Blackie. B, Pittsburgh Pinky. C, Baltimore Brownie. D, Glendale Goldie. I want to listen to all of these shows. A friend to those who had no friend on radio. This crime solver's first name was a U.S. metropolitan city. Who was it? Number 6. Clark Kent's editor at the Daily Planet was A, Terry Turquoise. B, Harry Lime. C, Barry Black and Blue.
Oh.
D, Perry White. Who was Clark Kent's editor at the Daily Planet? Number 7. Smilin' Ed's Kids Show on Saturday mornings from 1944 to 1953 was subtitled what? A, Luster Silver Team. B, Duster Tan Group. C, Muster Maroon Kids. D, Buster Brown Gang. I feel like none of those are right. I'm sure that Smilin' Ed's Kids Show on Saturday morning was subtitled what? Number 8. Played by Frank Lovejoy, this crime fighter was a radio copycat of the Green Hornet. Even his name was similar. What was it? A, the fuchsia flycatcher. B, the white wasp. C, the maroon moth. D, the blue beetle. Played by Frank Lovejoy, this crime fighter was a radio copycat of the Green Hornet. Even his name was similar. What was it? Number 9. A popular soap opera Our Gal Sunday aired for nearly 20 years. What was its country western theme song? A. Silver Stream Gorge. B. Emerald Rim Canyon. C. Turquoise Mountain Trail. D. Red River Valley. A popular soap opera, Our Gal Sunday, aired for nearly 20 years. What was its country western theme song? Number 10. Orson Welles was the star of a BBC crime drama in the early 50s that Mutual also aired in the US. It was called what? A. The Amber Archives. B. The Violet Vault. C. The Orange Observatory. D. The Black Museum. I keep all of my oranges at the observatory. Orson Welles was the star of a BBC crime drama in the early 50s that Mutual also aired in the US. What was it called? Hold on to your answer pages because we will go over the answers of this quiz after our main program. Make sure your name is on your paper and today's date, and use a different color to correct your answers so that I know you weren't cheating. We're back in school now, children. So we're taking things very seriously. Very seriously.
Thank you, Sally. I can't wait to hear the answers. Well, tonight our guest is Dr. Joe Webb, and he's a friend of the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club and also to the wider world of old time radio. Because he's been with us before, he didn't feel there was a need for an introduction, but I felt otherwise. Dr. Joe began collecting old time radio while he was still in high school. In the late 1970s and into the 1980s, he worked actively on convention committees in the early years of the Friends of Old Time Radio convention. An avid and excellent researcher, Dr. Joe has published old time radio newsletters and articles. He is a regular contributor to the Old Time Radio Researchers Facebook page. He is actively researching and working on book projects for Suspense, Casey Crime Photographer, and the subject of tonight's program, The Big Story. Along with other volunteers, Dr. Joe is working on transferring several pioneer collections to digital format, the best of which is the Joe Hain Memorial Collection. With a bachelor's degree from Manhattan College, an MBA from Iona University, and a PhD from NYU, coming to us tonight from his home in Wake Forest, North Carolina, is Dr. Joe Webb and The Big Story. Joe, let me give you co-hosting here so that we can, I can try doing that right now. Let me see.
I didn't send you the education stuff.
That's all right. Hey, that's what the internet is for.
That's what LinkedIn is for. I know. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, there was so much more to be said, but I limited it to that, Joe.
It felt really good to send you a bio that had nothing to do with business.
Well, and there was plenty of that online to be found.
Are you? Do I have it yet, or?
Let me see here. I got to remember how Wendy showed me how to do this. John, where are you? I got to find where you are so that I can roll.
You can just find his name and
What?
that's where you make him a co-host
Wait a
on
second.
the list of attendees.
Here we go. I got it. There you go. You're co-host now, John.
Okay. Let's share the screen. Here goes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I was always interested in newspapers from the time I was little. And the big story just fascinated me when I found some shows when I was a new collector. The first big story I heard was from a collector in Oregon named Al Kozaliski. When I had sent him a note a couple of years ago when he sent me the copies. They had just discovered these 2 shows, and everybody was thrilled because there weren't that many big story episodes. So it's I've always had an interest in this series, and a couple of years ago, Matt Nunes, who's also an academic researcher and teacher, posted something on the Cobalt Club, and that started the ball rolling for all of this. So the title is The Stories Behind the Big Story, and there are very, very many. We're going to highlight a few, and also how the series began. And it was pretty amazing to me as I dug into the actual news stories, how gruesome some of them were, and then how innocuous the big story made them turn out to be. It was one of the most successful radio and television crossovers in the history of the overlap of the 2 media. It was a hit as soon as it got onto radio. And then when they moved it to television, they had the overlap for quite a number of years. Different stories on each one, but the television program did adapt some of the radio scripts. And then by 1958, they put together a syndication package. And if any of you have seen the Big Story TV show, it's usually with Burgess Meredith, and those are the episodes that they did there. But there's 381 episodes plus the audition, and I'll talk about the audition a lot. And there were 314 TV episodes, and it's really curious to see how they played all that out. And I'll go through the television series toward the end. We need a lot of research on this series. So if anybody wants to dig into IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and some other resources, there's not much on the television program. There's a lot on the radio program. We need the rerun count. We need because they kept changing the titles, and also programs where the newspaper reporter actually made an appearance on the TV show. They never really made any appearances on the radio program. The audition was called Feature Assignment, and it's was a little grittier than the Big Story would actually become. The network had a policy of fictionalization that was really quite interesting. And there was one of the perpetrators of a crime who actually sued them, even though the program was fictionalized. 50 programs have survived. If you go into Radio Gold Index, you'll see 29. So over the past decade, we've gotten 11 more shows. Most of them are AFRS. We've got 47 complete, 34 of those in our network. The way we've been finding programs now has been through Armed Forces radio discs. And we also have some partial network recordings. But that's not so bad because we have most all of the scripts because of the American tobacco litigation. So we're 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 8 are around. There's a lot more to find. And some of these programs are just absolutely marvelous. Now, it almost could have gone to Mark Hellinger. Many of you know that Mark Hellinger was a producer on one of the famous films is High Sierra, but he was thrown out of high school and then became a journalist by the time he was 20, and then a newspaper columnist. And he caught the attention of Warner Brothers, and he was hired by them, and that's how he got into the movies. But he never forgot the newspaper business. He was really fascinated by all of that, and eventually met up with Homer Canfield from NBC, who was also a former newspaper columnist. And they worked on this idea and had a writer, Warren Lewis, who was also very interested in newspapers. So they came up with a program called The Fourth Estate. And this was an audition that was done in June of 1946. But if you listen to it, it sounds an awful lot like The Big Story. It has a lot of those elements in it, even though the audition for what would become The Big Story was 4 months before. Fourth Estate even had a sponsor and still couldn't come to air. Hellinger passed away at age 44 after The Big Story went on the air. So he did hear his idea actually work. And Warren Lewis, we would know because he would be the writer for Nightbeat, also another newspaper program. I have a webpage at the end of the presentation that you can go to, and you can hear The Fourth Estate, and you'll see what it was. A very, very good program. Strangely, it had a studio audience. Now, Bernard Proctor was the cousin of Bill Paley, and I think that's interesting because neither of these shows were done by CBS, and he was in broadcasting in the 1930s. So he had been around for a while, mainly on variety programs, and he was reading a magazine article about Joseph Magic, and the author of that, or the newspaper reporter, was named Jim McGuire, and he helped get Joseph Magic out of jail. It was a case of mistaken identity, and I'll go through that in more detail, and police intimidation and police corruption. And the story was so good, it eventually became a movie called Northside 77, which I'm sure some of you have seen. But after he read the story about the incident, Proctor became convinced that there are all kinds of stories in these independent newspaper markets. I mean, newspaper business is really regional. There really weren't any national newspapers at this time. People knew the reporters, but the national news business was really Associated Press and United Press. And so Proctor got this idea that every town has a story, every town has a reporter who had a big story of their career, and he wanted to put all of them together. So they began to solicit stories from reporters, and they would visit some of the big newspapers in these towns and interview them, and they would come up with the stories. And by the time the series got on the air, it was such a big hit. They were getting about 25 ideas for stories, and most of the times the reporters would just send them newspaper clippings of their work. And they had a real lot to choose from. Proctor really wanted to break the old-time radio, or at that time it wasn't old, stereotype of the newspaper. And as I'm reading this particular directive of his, which was be sure that every reporter is portrayed as he really is, and then not as the stereotyped hard-boiled whiskey swigging news hawk, I think, there goes Casey Crime Photographer, my favorite series, and he just flushed it on us. But The Big Story, it really wanted to be real, and as real as they could. They all followed a very similar pattern. Proctor got his wish that the reporter is identified as just a normal person who happens to work for a newspaper. They're grinding out a life and a career every day. And then there is a particular event or a particular situation that comes to their attention, and they realize that this could be a really important story, and they devote usually a disproportionate amount of their time to that. They start interacting with the police, anybody affected by the events. They talk to the families, they gather the facts, and eventually the story becomes their personal mission, because no one wants to follow the story. It seems hopeless, that there's no real solution, there's no real ending to it. Everything's a dead end. So usually there are two people who have enough fortitude to stick it out, and that's the reporter and a victim family member. Everybody else wants them to stop. Then suddenly they come up with a witness, or they find some new evidence that creates an opportunity for insight that only the reporter can have. And then the story follows through to its conclusion. Justice is always applied. There's corrections of injustice. And there's always some kind of solution where the perpetrator gets their due, or an innocent person is exonerated of the crime. But that's a pattern. And I used to complain about, all those shows have the same kind of pattern. And then Jack Beck reminded me, well, that's what people want to go to the story for. That's why they tune in. They know that there's a pattern there. They're comfortable with it, and they really want to follow it through. And it's up to the writers to make it interesting, even though the pattern might be the same. Now, at the time in the 1940s and the 1950s, newspapers were an essential part of daily life. Most big towns had more than one newspaper. There was usually at least one morning paper and one evening paper, because TV news in the evening had not started yet. And they could actually see pictures. So this was a benefit of the newspaper compared to radio. On one hand, the radio is very good at allowing people to imagine what a certain situation is going to be. But if you were talking about the news, it was very helpful to see who the actual people were, as opposed to imagining what FDR looked like, for example. Bob Stepnow is on the Old Time Radio Researchers Facebook page very often, and he has a website, and I'll have a live link to it at the webpage that we've set up. And he heard this quote. He doesn't know who to attribute it to, but there's a certain kind of smugness among newspapers that's legendary about them. And the line goes, newspapermen think they meet the most interesting people, and most of them appear to be other newspapermen. But there were actually newspaper writers and journalists and researchers and editors who had incredible and very heroic careers. And the big story sought to find a lot of those people. The morning and the evening papers gave them a chance to have a lot of dynamic things going on within those particular towns as the reporters tried to one-up each other on having really good coverage of the stories. And people were used to having a morning and an evening paper so that they could see how stories were playing out during the day. One of the reporters or editor that Big Story focused on was Paul Schoenfeld of the New York Journal American. And he actually had a formula where in the morning you describe the crime. In the afternoon, because there were also afternoon editions, you create speculation as to what really happened, even though you knew it was not possible. And in the evening, you have the solution for it. So people would have to buy at least 2 newspapers during the day, and maybe a third one to get the full story. One of the ways that the Big Story got some credibility was to have a prize that was given to the reporter, and that was $500. And that was a number picked for a good reason, because at that time, the Pulitzer Prize was $500. So American Tobacco was giving a reporter the same amount for the Pulitzer Prize, trying to get them to have the same kind of stature for having their story dramatized on the program. Pulitzer didn't like that, and they later doubled it to $1,000. And American Tobacco didn't have to because it worked. The big story became one of the favorite programs on radio and later television. It's really interesting listening to these stories today, and you realize that we couldn't have a lot of these stories in the same manner. Communications now would seem primitive, but only businesses had phones, and wealthy people and homes had phones. So the idea that reporters needed access to a phone was kind of new and novel. And you always had the tension of, can they find a payphone to call the story in? They had to go back to the office or try to call in to the office to get the story taken down, but they really had to be in the office. And a lot of the big story takes place there, the interaction of the editors with other reporters. In terms of the crimes, I mean, security video is all over the place today. DNA technology would have solved a lot of crimes before they even got to big story status. There are lots of scripts that are about mistaken identity. And it's very clear that these kinds of stories would not be happening today. I mean, we've gone from the reporter and the detective doing the hard work of pounding the streets to now so much more occurs in the lab, and more people are familiar with this because of TV programs like Crime Scene Investigation. Another thing that is interesting with the stories is how accepted and quick the application of capital punishment was. So when we go into the true events, it's not uncommon for someone to be found guilty and then 18 months later for them to be executed. This added another sense of tension in the story that made the reporters' work to exonerate somebody all the more important, because they were working against the clock. They had to not only find witnesses, it had to be credible witnesses, they had to find evidence that was not really subject to any kind of scientific testing the way they are today. And they had to be convincing not just to their editor, but also to the authorities and in some cases, the governor's office. So this added another sense, another plot aspect that would not necessarily be had today. And then there are some very sad stories where mental illness was not diagnosed and other issues in terms of the perpetrators of the crimes would be addressed today, but they really weren't understood at that time, or there was no kind of treatment for them. So they were allowed to continue dysfunctional behavior related to crimes, when today they would have gotten treatment. One of the people I'll talk about later, just had he been able to get disability and not go into an office, probably wouldn't have perpetrated the crime that he had. So you're taking a step back into classic radio because we love that, but this has an overlay of history on it that if you understand the context of it, it becomes all the more fascinating. So February 1946, they produce an audition called Feature Assignment. Was originally going to be called Special Assignment, but on the script that Carl Shadow was able to help secure, you can see that it was changed to Feature Assignment. And it's about that case in Chicago. The case basically went like this. A cop is shot when there's a deli robbery, but it turns out it's not really a deli. It's a speakeasy with a deli front that other cops were covering up who were on the take. They wanted to close the case very quickly, so they found basically 3 teenagers or young men who they could blame on this, and they intimidated the owner of the deli to say that these are the people she saw, and they threatened her by saying that they would charge her with bootlegging. So she suddenly becomes a witness who's very knowledgeable about everything that went on. People are suspicious about this. The judge tells Magic that he believes he was framed, but he can't do anything. The state prosecutor wants this case to stay down and not come up. So he ends up going to jail. He keeps saying that he's innocent, but nobody believes him. So realizing that he's going to be in jail for a very long time, he tells his wife, Helen, to divorce him so that she is free to marry and raise a family. In 1941, this is 9 years after the event and 8 years after the trial, his parole request is turned down. So things look very bleak. Then at the end of 1944, his mother places an ad in the Chicago Daily Times. And this is the twist on it that made it so interesting, especially for the plot line of Call Northside 777. The telephone numbers didn't have as many digits at that time. She offered $5,000 as a reward for the real killers. Now, she was a charwoman. She cleaned offices overnight, and her husband worked in a Chicago slaughterhouse. So they didn't have a whole lot of money. So they really scraped this up for years and years to offer this reward. McGuire, the Chicago Times reporter, sees this ad and starts to investigate, and he starts to re-interview everybody involved. He's convinced that the story is true, that the mother is very sincere in wanting this done, and so he decides that yes, this is a really good case for this. There's a serious wrongdoing that went on here, and he finds out that there was the threat of the bootlegging charge, that there was also testimony that the police hid, and also her false testimony. And gradually it worked its way through the system. He is released. The Times, of course, refuses the reward money, and Magic gets $24,000 from the state of Illinois. One of the people who was with him didn't get justice until like another 3 years later, but they got $330,000. He remarries the wife. She had a child with the other man, and unfortunately he died in 1979 in a car accident. But the story was always being brought up in Chicago, and there were a lot of law review articles about it and what was done. On the left-hand side is Joe and his mother, Tilly, who cleaned all those offices. And on the right-hand side is the reporter Jim McGuire, Helen, Joe, Jim, and the stepdaughter, Theodora. And if you want more information on this particular case, there's lots of resources on it, including a site that I have. So that was the audition, and it languished for a while because the Fourth Estate thing was going on. That didn't gain any traction. And finally, NBC says, we're going to do the big story. We have American Tobacco. They're going to be the sponsor. And NBC issues a statement, which basically says, we don't want the program to be horror for horror's sake. We like suspense and intense dramatic values better than cheap substitution of blood-curdling and sometimes revolting horror. All right, so first, they got rid of Casey Crime Photographer on me, and now they're telling me that House in Cypress Canyon is a bad show, okay? And then while they have all this feature assignment stuff, they really like it, they changed the title to The Big Story. Now, where did that come from? Well, as I'm doing newspaper searches on this, I keep getting searches of a horse named The Big Story from spring of 1947. And this is a really good horse because it's been asked to, or nominated to go into the Kentucky Derby. And it won a lot of smaller races in various regions around the country. So every time I'm looking for The Big Story, I keep coming up with Big Story the horse. And it started to make me wonder if, in addition to the morning newspaper and the evening newspaper, somebody was reading the daily racing form and seeing this horse named The Big Story doing so well. It's one of those things that we'll never know if it's true, but it seems awfully suspicious to me. My money's on the horse. So what's this fictionalization thing? Big Story was concerned about legal issues. They didn't want anybody suing them for misrepresenting the facts or being accused of misrepresenting the facts. So they have this idea, and I don't think this is their phrase, but it started to pop up in other places called authentic fictionalization, which sounds like a bureaucratic thing, you know? So telling the truth on the air, you're always going to have a legal risk. I've got the same name, or this happened to me, you're telling my story, whatever. So this is what they do. They keep the reporter, they keep the reporter's newspaper affiliation, they keep the geography. So that the geography turns out to be a key piece of this in trying to uncover the original stories, but they disguise everything else. And they also have the task of fitting the story into a very short period of time, because they have to allow for commercials as part of the 30 minutes, and also the introduction and their close and all that. So it comes out to around 22 to 23 minutes. So there's a lot of composite characters, and they want to keep the details in such a way that people will see how everything plays out. And then by the end, they're saying, "Oh yeah, that's right, because such and such happened." It's interesting to read reviews of the program, because there are a lot of complaints about the middle commercial interrupting the story, which means that even the critics were fully engaged in the story and wanted to know how it ended, and they stuck a commercial in there. So it was pretty compelling drama for its time. They were always sympathetic to the reporter. The reporter is humble. The reporter is smart. The reporter is good to his dog. The reporter is tenacious. The reporter just loves everybody, okay? Not that there aren't some grumpy reporters, of course there are, but that was the idea, that they were going to make sure the reporter is the hero in the story. This was interesting. They always wanted to make the reporters seem like they were lifelong journalists. And one of the problems researching these stories has been that a lot of the reporters only were in the business 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years, not for their entire career. Some of them made tremendous career changes. But by the time the story comes on, The Big Story, you'd never know that that reporter may have had a career for the last 15 years, and they just plucked this out of the archives, and the reporter's name is suddenly on it again. So there may have been some very surprised reporters or ex-reporters who found out that their story was going to be on The Big Story. To move the story along, they used narration. They had lots of different scenes. They jump in the timeline, and that's very important. So they got to keep the story simple. They can't really have anything very complex, because the story's got to move. The gruesomeness of some of these crimes is really suppressed. But the crime can be passed, but you still have the victims describing the effects of the crimes, maybe not the details of them. So while they don't show the crime, they are showing the effects of it. Like even on TV's original or classic Law and Order, you never see the crime committed. You always see the aftermath of the crime at the beginning of the program. Anytime that politicians or law enforcement might look bad, they're really reluctant to show it in that light, because not that they have a pledge to keep everybody looking squeaky clean, is that it complicates the stories. So if there's an injustice because the wrong person is in jail, that's kind of a given. And it's not always the fault of the justice system or the police. It's often the fault a witness did not come forward, or the witness was intimidated by a gangster or something like that. So it's kind of played down a little bit. Every police department has constraints of time and resources, and unfortunately, they don't always play out in the way that people want them to be. Not even the officers know that they played out the way that they would want it to be. But by the end of the story, all the cases are clean, complete, and justice is appropriately applied. Everything is fine, even if it's late. By the end, like a lot of the movie codes, good triumphs over evil. You can trust the law, and most of all, you can trust the press that they're going to be honest with everything that happens. Now, how do we find the original stories? Thank goodness for newspapers.com. That's our first step. We have to find the reporter in the newspaper, and that's not always as simple as it sounds, because there really weren't bylines at that time. A lot of the reporters who were associated with stories never had a byline for the news that they were reporting, because the story was from the newspaper. It wasn't from the reporter. Only columnists had bylines, and that gradually changed over the decades. But if you know the newspaper, you can start to suspect that it was a reporter. You can look at almost all of the scripts, and that will give you a lot of clues. They were all scanned as part of the American tobacco litigation. They're no longer online anymore, but the old-time radio researchers and others downloaded all of those files. The reason they were in the litigation was for the Pell Mell commercials. So thank goodness all of that is there. It's serving in a use that was never anticipated by all the lawyers, but they've been just absolutely terrific for anybody doing research on this series. The next thing to do is to try to find the reporter's obituary or a retirement story. Now, if the reporter did not have a long career, then their obituary may only barely mention that they had a newspaper career. But somebody who's been in the business a long time, that usually mentions that their work appeared on the big story. And it does get a high profile, just like winning a Pulitzer Prize would. Newspapers.com and other resources don't always have all the newspapers we'd like them to have. So you start looking for stories around the broadcast days. And if it's in the same town, they will often say, such and such a reporter's story is going to be on the big story this Thursday, and it's about the local story, and give you the details of the local story. And that's between the obituaries and that's the easiest way to find them. If you can get the name of the perpetrator, even better, because you get a lot of details there. The crosstown newspapers might cover the stories, but even if the big stories reporter worked for a paper and is no longer in the business, the crosstown papers will play down that other newspaper and that other reporter. It was really curious, the local competition. So here's an example. This is Aubrey Maddock, who had an early big story dramatization called The Final Curtain. This was the story that became Arsenic and Old Lace. And that story was in 2016. So that was the original date of the crime. And Maddock covered the story as working for the Hartford Courant when he was 27 years old. By the time it gets to the big story, it was 31 years after the story and 23 years after he left the newspaper business. But he never left Hartford. He became very big in real estate in Hartford. So when he passed away, he was extremely well known in the city, and they went through the things that he did in the realty business, but also they really played up his work as a reporter. So this became very easy to figure out what the story was and go back to it because it was so well reported. But it's an example how there are very few big stories that are recent, meaning like 2 or 3 years. Most of them are like 10 or 15 years earlier than the actual broadcast. The program was produced in New York, and because they have a timeline that they have to cover and a lot of different scenes, they hired many actors and they had them double. This particular program had 7 actors and 14 parts. And even the narrator, Bob Sloan, had to double. And the actor playing Harry Kodinsky had to double. So there's always group scenes or things that are occurring in the newsroom or out in the streets or in a restaurant, whatever, where they always need somebody new, somebody to come by and just say a couple of lines. And that's one thing that's really different. When you look at these scripts, that's one thing where they're really different than most other shows. They also made the script phonetic. Many times the characters in radio dramas have relatively simple names so that everybody can pronounce them. So Lamont Cranston may not be a common name, but when you see it on your script, you're gonna get it right. They were always concerned that pell mell, spelled with an A, would be mispronounced on the program. So in the script, they put it in phonetically. And if there was a reporter who had either an ethnic spelling or a special pronunciation, they would put in pronunciation information. And then in this particular case for Frank McCullough, after they would go through the rehearsal and get the name right, they would cross that out in the script so they didn't accidentally say it. But it was important for them to be accurate. After all, this is a news story. Now, I always wondered how the reporters, what their relationship was with the producers and how much they really got and what the legal relationship was. There was a program I was really having a tough time looking for. It was a murder in Las Vegas, and the reporter was John Callan. And I just couldn't find it. And one day I'm doing a Google search and I found that his papers were at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas. So I contacted the research desk there and by email and got a hold of Maggie Bukowski, who's the curator, and asked her about this. And sure enough, she found that there was the contract and some other support materials. So this is reveals a tremendous amount about the program. I was in business all of my career from the late 70s until I retired. I never saw a contract this short before about something so important. And all it is, it's a blank form. And thankfully, it gave the name of the crime. So finally, I had a way of going into newspapers.com and looking for it. The reporter gives them permission to use the name, and then he's going to get a check for $500. He basically had to do nothing other than let them use his name. He'd get more money if it was used on television. So the contract for him was contract for radio. If they used it on television, he gets another $100. So you multiply it by 11, so it's $1,100. So he's getting about $5,500 just for use of his name. And then if it's used in the magazine, The Big Story, and that's a failed magazine, there was only 3 issues, I'll explain that later. But if they turn it into a movie, he's going to get $5,000 if it's a feature movie. But if it's one of those second features, he's only going to get $1,000. But this is it. It's signed by the reporter. It gives you his home address and his phone number. Las Vegas only had 4-digit phone numbers at that time. And I thought it was very curious that it doesn't specify anything about the relationship with the reporter about the production of the scripts. That did happen. They did have interviews of the reporters by the people who were going to be writing the scripts so they could get a sense of things. And the reporters sent newspaper clippings. This is a letter that Callan sent to the person responsible for these things at Proctor, where Proctor is misspelled by Callan. Gee, that's interesting. I just saw that. So he sent them a resume of the story, so basically an outline, his autobiography, and copies of the printed stories. And this was in July 1953. It took about 8 months or so. They actually produced it on the show, and on the right-hand side, you can see the letter that he got from the president of American Tobacco. And it's all puffery and stuff, and there's the check. And then, as a lasting memento of your distinguished service to journalism, you got a bronze plaque that everybody would ooh and ah about in your office, assuming, of course, you were still in the newspaper business. This was a very interesting story, and while they fictionalized it, most of the facts are there. There are some stories where you can barely recognize it. There's one I'll explain. It's like it's a totally different story. So there were some railroad workers at Union Pacific in Las Vegas, and one of them had a wife. So that was Wayne and his wife Evelyn. They're riding with a coworker to go outside of town, and Wayne thinks that Galen has been fooling around with Evelyn, and Wayne shoots Galen in front of Evelyn. Then they decide to drive back home into town. That must have been a very interesting ride, unfortunately. And then he parks the car, they have a conversation, and he kills her. And then he walks to the train station. And there he sees a coworker, Charles Decker. He was just over the Decker's house a couple of nights before, and he shoots him. Then he goes into a bar to contemplate everything he's done, have a couple of drinks, and probably to say how satisfying all that was. And then the police come, and he threatens everyone in there in the bar, and the police want to shoot him, but there's a bartender who might be accidentally in the way. So the police don't shoot. They do get an angle to run toward him, but he commits suicide before the officer can stop him. Then they found Gilmore's body. And that was done by some people who were driving out into the outskirts of town and are trying to get a grasshopper out of the car, and they stumble across the body, which is very interesting. That's probably a weekend they were talking about for quite a while. And that was the story. And this is broadcast in 1954, and you see the actual story occurred in 1941. And it's pretty well intact. One of the worst adaptations was when Walter Winchell's work to bring gangster Louis Lepke into the FBI was dramatized. This was put in the wash a couple of times. Lepke was already dead, and I don't know why they didn't make it a little more graphic, but the cornered cat refers to the time that Lepke was hiding out from the police and other folks who were out to get him. And it sounds so benign that you'd think it was parking tickets that he had done. You don't get a real sense of the story until you listen to the Dot Records LP release, which was popular because Winchell was narrating The Untouchables at the time. If you listen to that and then listen to this big story, you'll sense quite a difference. One reporter, Ray Spriegel from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, was a real legendary reporter. And he was very disappointed with the way that they had adapted his story. And he told the newspaper critic of the paper that the true story would have been a lot more interesting and effective and powerful. And the newspaper television critics said that the big story was one of the worst shows on television. and because he knew a lot of the inside stuff that was going on. So the way it was cleaned up was there's a guy on Earth unjustly jailed. His requests for parole are always denied. The ex-wife, and that was a little twist in the story, the ex-wife was going with information to try to get him released, not that she had any intention of getting back together with him. And they, the reporter and an attorney start to go through the details of the case, and they find some perjury, they get a new confession, and the husband is released. The real story was a little bit more complex. The prosecutors wanted to get rid of this case, and they were actively coaching witnesses during the trial. The person, Paul Boggs, didn't have enough money to hire his own attorney, so he used the same attorney as the guy he was with who actually did the murder. So he's kind of left in the back and not getting proper representation from the attorney. And the attorney did keep his client out of the electric chair, but Boggs got swept into jail just like he did. There was a cover-up of among witnesses and who actually worked on the crime and could exonerate Boggs, but they did not because they were threatened, and the prosecutors just didn't want to go near the case anymore. So by the time that Spriegel had done his work with the lawyers, there was a period of time when the correct criminal was in jail and down a few cells from Paul Boggs, who was still in jail unjustly. He was eventually released, wanted nothing to do with his family, unfortunately. He was appreciative, but he went directly to the draft board and went into the military, and despite everything that happened to him, became a first-class soldier in that regard. This next one was an absolute mess. Many of you know the name Max Ehrlich, who wrote thousands of radio scripts. I don't think that's an outlandish number to think of. And he probably had a story. He wrote for The Shadow, so he's probably thinking of weird stories that could work on The Shadow. And he gets this story written by Stuart Whitehouse in Seattle. And I knew something was wrong when I went to the back page of the script and heard it on the recording, that tonight's program was adapted by Max Ehrlich from an actual story from the front pages of the West Seattle Herald, which basically means headline. And what is the headline? A woman is dead, murdered in her apartment. And then Ehrlich seemed to take it from there. The story that Ehrlich used, and it may have been from a different series that he just reused here, it seems a little different. An out-of-work magician meets a young divorcee in a bar. He thinks they're getting along. They go to her apartment. He does some magic tricks. She doesn't like the tricks. She doesn't like him. He gets angry. He strangles her with a yo-yo cord, and police are baffled until they eventually figure out that it's a yo-yo cord. That's the fictionalized story. The real story is that this was a brutal murder of a socialite by her husband, who bludgeoned her with a closet rod. She was in the news because she was the second wife of the husband. He had a very high-profile divorce in San Francisco, a society divorce, 5 years before. And then in a scene that you'd think you'd see in a movie or in television today, he's beaten her and she still says, "Kiss me goodbye, I'm dying." And that scene is not in the script. Police start to piece together that's the husband who did it. They go back to the murder scene, and then eventually he starts getting very talkative about how he got rid of the murder weapon and the like. He decides to plead innocent. His attorney quits. Whatever happens, he's convicted and then dies in 1943. That's slightly different than a yo-yo cord. Stuart Whitehouse was really hard to track down. He worked for the West Seattle Herald, but he went from writing job to writing job and was a very prolific detective magazine writer. I did find where the archives were for the West Seattle Herald, but I'm trying to give them search terms like magician, strangled with a cord and stuff like that, and nothing is coming up. And of course, because Max Ehrlich had a script that he couldn't use somewhere else, so he put it here. And then, of course, is the reused script. The big story about the lottery gimmicks in Atlanta by Keeler McCartney, who worked for the Atlanta Constitution, was a legitimate story. It's called The Lottery there, but growing up in New York, it's the numbers. So people are betting in bars, and it's a big money maker for organized crime. And Gail Ingram writes a script for it, and then so that's on the chart on the right-hand side. Harry, her husband, they collaborated often on a series called Tales of Fatima, and other things. And he needed a script for Casey Crime Photographer, for which he had written before. So they pulled this one out of the file, and he changes it. So this chart shows the different pieces of the story. The dialogue is very, very similar for much of the script. And so they went through item by item and just changed the names and locations and all. And the Casey story is very good. The big story is very good. And someone at the Cobalt Club said, I was posting Casey programs at the time. And then by the time I got to the big story, they said, you better look at this. So I did. I can't speak highly enough about all the friends at the Cobalt Club and how much they help in this research. We've got some marvelous people who listen to the programs with great intent and a level of intensity that I don't normally have. So it's really great to work with them. Harry Ingram unfortunately passed away not long after the Casey program was broadcast. He died in a fire in some landscaping work at his home. Gail moved to Hollywood and became a writer mainly for television, and also became a mentor for women who were looking to break into script writing and other aspects of television and movies. So they're a very interesting couple, very important couple in the history of radio, especially New York radio. The conviction reversal story is very common here. And again, we don't have DNA, we don't have security cameras, we don't have a lot of crime lab stuff. So what happened here, this is in Cleveland, a store is robbed, they run out of the store, a bank guard comes out of the bank, and he looks threatening, so they kill him. And they blame someone who wasn't even in town, a fellow named John Kaczynski, because they somehow had found out that when he went on the road as a band leader, he had changed his name. So that made him guilty of, I guess, almost every crime that they couldn't solve. He wasn't in Cleveland at that time. And his wife obviously became very upset and frustrated with this. She starts researching everything herself. And it turns out it was yet another case of intimidation, this time by the perpetrators of the crime, the ex-cons who had tried to rob that store. Kaczynski gets in touch with Howard Buffet, and they find one of the people in jail arrested for something else. And they start realizing that something's going on here, and he refused to talk. And they did find the original witness. They convinced her that she was safe because this guy was in jail, and then she admitted that she was intimidated all the way. And he was paroled for manslaughter, but he was not pardoned. I think that was very interesting. Somebody was trying to save face there. He got no compensation from Ohio, and they just basically packed up and moved to the West Coast. I couldn't find where they went. This is a sad one. This one is a real cover-up of mental illness in the story, called The Mind of the Little Boy. Takes place in Utah, and this is the way it's sanitized. This would be the description in the TV guide. Let's put it that way. A maladjusted, immature stalker has crying fits. He kills 3 people because he was spurned by one of them who was a widowed woman, and he murders victims because they were mean to him. And he ends up sitting in a diner crying when they catch him. The real story is almost it's just incredibly bizarre. It's a man named Pascal Boyer who sometimes goes by the name of George Rutledge. He's called the Pig because he was a butcher. He had a history of brain injuries and mental illness that started when scaffolding fell on him in 1928 and was unconscious for 3 days. You think, gosh, they would have done an MRI on this poor man's brain and found something, but all they know was that he had constant headaches, he had heavy aspirin use, he would be in the office, people would give him aspirin, everybody had aspirin in his desk for him because they knew he was always taking it. And he starts getting very absent-minded. He just can't remember things that had happened even just minutes before. He's forgetting people, he's forgetting tasks that he's done, and the doctors kept telling him to rest. So they moved to Colorado. There he gets hit with an iron bar, leaving a dent in his skull. And of course, he's not getting any better from this. His absent-mindedness, it gets so bad that he would be having dinner at home with his wife and forget that she was there. He kept thinking that she had just walked in the door, even though they were together for hours. He finally gets diagnosed with amnesia and something called epileptic automatism, which is something that happens with people with epilepsy, where they can lose track of things and lose context and then not be able to recall things. I know that I'm not giving an accurate description of it, but this is what he had. So he goes on this killing spree of these 3 people, and the cop is notified that he's there because they're looking for him, and the cop goes in faking being drunk, and that's the way he sneaks up on him. Boyer thinks that he's a drunk guy in the diner, and the cop grabs him right there. And eventually it goes into court, and he knows that something's wrong with him, and he says in the court, it would be unwise to turn me loose. He's judged insane. I mean, what took them so long? And he dies months later of a heart condition. So this really didn't help anybody. I mean, one of the reasons that you'll read capital punishment being justified is the satisfaction that you caught somebody. Nobody even got that out of this. Unfortunately, 3 people died because of the lack of knowledge about the mental illness and lack of medical imaging and the like. This was a situation where the big story was soothed by a person who learned that her story was going to come up on the show. So she got a lawyer and decided, no, you're not, because I'm going to sue you. You can't show this story and or perform this story. It's pretty bad. She murdered her family, her husband and 2 kids. And she claimed it was in self-defense that she killed the husband after he killed the kids. But she eventually confessed and was convicted. And then when this program is coming to the air almost 9 years later, suddenly she's claiming a right to privacy, which I think is kind of amusing in a cynical kind of way, because she got a lot of publicity for killing her family. And then that the broadcast would cause her harassment, ridicule, and humiliation in jail. So it's just kind of very, very strange. She sued the writer of the story, the local station, and others. Her name in the story is MWOTRC, and it doesn't sound anything like that. It does sound ethnic, like her last name of Kolinich, but it was protected in that way. It goes to court. just hours before broadcast time, and that NBC was going to preempt the show in Flint, Michigan, where the crime basically occurred and where she was. And the program did air. The judge refused to do anything because it was from New York. It was not from Flint. He had no authority in this area, and it had used all kinds of fictitious names. She claimed that she was still going to sue some more. It never came up again. So it almost looks like, hey, remember me? I'm the one the story is about. Like maybe she was looking for a book deal or something. They didn't do book deals at that time. And then there are some heartwarming stories. One is by Virginia Marmaduke and her photographer, Joseph Kordick from the Chicago Sun-Times. Marmaduke had a very long career and was very well known in all Chicago political and social circles. And she would often do stories where she thought people were getting a raw deal. And in this particular case, there was a baby who had a rare birth defect, which they don't mention on the show, but they mention in the newspapers. Part of the urinary system, including the bladder, were outside the body. So an operation was needed to return it or bring it inside the body. And this was, at that time, and would still be today, a difficult operation. And there was always danger of having children go under anesthesia for such kind of surgeries. Well, the debate over whether or not to have the surgery separated the parents, and they just could not get along. They could not live in the same house, and the baby was kind of caught in the middle. So Marmaduke finds out about this, so she starts contacting doctors, and eventually comes up with somebody in another state who had a child with the same condition and had the surgery, and were very pleased by it and incredibly happy about it. So it took a while, but that's the nature of this story. The Search That Saved a Life refers to finding that other family. And I did search around for the person. The first time I searched a couple of years ago, she was living in Texas, and it seems like she's now living in Louisiana, and she's in her mid-70s. So that's interesting. This other story was about Dorothy Patterson, who wrote for the Patterson, New Jersey Morning Call as Penny Pennington. And she found a young boy, Johnny McDermott, who had a disease that needed some extremely expensive treatment. So she was told the story by the doctors and the family, and then she told the story to the readers, and she asked for people to send in money. Well, they were overwhelmed by the amount of money that came in and was coming in even from out of state. So it started to go into a fund called the Save a Child Fund, and they would hold dances and competitions and all kinds of events through the years to raise money for other children who needed this. And at the end of this particular broadcast, you can hear Johnny McDermott thank people for everything that was done for him and that he was doing well. Now, the magazine, they thought they could really build a big franchise of having a radio, television, and print, and the magazine didn't do all that well. It's interesting. I have a copy, and I saw that the editor was Walter B. Gibson. I said, wait a second, that's the guy who made The Shadow, and it was. Gibson was a good writer, a very, very good writer, and he wrote very fast. He would write an entire Shadow novel over a span of 4 days. And so they would give him show scripts, and he would develop a novel or short story from them. And then they would take photos from the TV kinescopes, or if it was a radio program, they would go into a photographic studio and hire models to be whatever illustrations they wanted for the crime. So they weren't going to go with line drawings. They were going to go with photographs to make it seem more up to date. And this was also a place where you could see, I hope you can see that, where you could see the reporters. They always were trying to push the reporters. And you'd think that it would be a good deal. So it came out for 3 months, October, November, and December of 1951, and then it ended. And it was a home office business. So Yonkers was not where Walter B. Gibson lived. That's probably where the publisher lived. And it was just operated out of there, and it just never took off. But all three are around. I got a really bad copy. I think I paid $10 for that. The television program did very, very well. Even in its early years, you can see here from summer of 1950 ratings, it was number 6 in the country in terms of percentage of TV homes. It became a very long-running franchise. It was one of the few shows to have very good on-location filming and studio work. So they would send out a crew to go film the actual locations, the diners where the crime occurred, and the various homes and all that. And they often got newspaper coverage for doing that locally. They would use local people, for instance, to walk the streets and go past stores and all that. The same fictionalization guidelines would be there. And occasionally, because it was television, the actual reporter would appear at the end of the broadcast. The reporter did not play themselves, but they would appear at the end. And in the case of somebody who was freed because of the work of the reporter, they might appear then as well. You do have a mix of scripts. The radio scripts actually do pretty well in terms of being adapted. There aren't that many recordings. There are 2 on YouTube and 1 at University of Georgia, and I have links to those on the web page. There's there's 6 that are on a DVD that you can buy through Amazon. It's not available. No, it's not available on Amazon, but if you search online for a Big Story DVD, you can get 6 episodes. And there's about another 4 or 5 that people have been finding, most of them from the syndicated series. I'm at the end of my tour, so there's a lot more Big Story to be found. It seems to be getting a little bit more interest as people hear about some of the real life stories that are behind them, and that some more stories or more recordings are out. I mean, when I started collecting, I think there were only about 8 or 9. Now there's 50. I mean, that's a big jump. There's never been a big disc run discovery like you have of so many other series. There's a lot of the CBS series. We have long runs, but not really for NBC. We keep hoping that something will show up somewhere. There may be some at Library of Congress where there are a lot of NBC recordings, but we don't really know. And if it's there, but nobody can have access because they haven't been cataloged or transferred, then they're kind of not there. The series didn't have a big star, so there's no interest in the program because I like the way Frank Lovejoy does Nightbeat. So it has to be carried from a different perspective. Also, newspapers have fallen a lot. I think the average home now gets something like 0.2 newspapers a day. So many people are now relying on the internet for getting their news and being able to do a deep dive into many stories about the same thing. We're working hard to get better sounding recordings. We're trying to find, through all these reel collections that we're transferring, trying to find more recordings closer to the original discs and save them as FLAC as opposed to MP3 files. That seems to be going pretty well, but we're not finding all 50 of them. So I would ask you to tell others in the club and anybody else you run into that the Big Story is a good show. there is a website which I have created for you and for everyone. And I have a short link, bit.ly/the initials of your club and the words big story. And you can download a PDF of the slides. I'll put the video of the presentation there, and you'll have links to the Big Story website. I've posted all of the circulating Big Story episodes on archive.org, so you can go listen to them there or download them there. There's links to 3 Big Story episodes. 2 of them are on YouTube, and one of them is at University of Georgia. That's an interesting one because the YouTube ones are from this, I believe, both from the syndicated run, and the one at Georgia is the more authentic original broadcast. And then there's lots of other news there. I did some suspense 80th anniversary events over these past few months. There's a Theater 5 update and some information about the finding of a missing Gunsmoke. That means that there's only 4 Gunsmokes missing out of the entire run. Now we finally got one. So I'll turn everything over to Frank. If Frank is still there.
Yes, yeah, well, I had a power outage. I don't know whether anybody saw that. My generator came on, but at that time I was afraid that I had lost the whole meeting, but
okay.
Apparently it didn't terminate anything, so I'm glad. Joe, as always, your presentations are complete, they're thorough, informative, and you give us so much more with your links and things like that so that we can enjoy it. And you know that from the first time you mentioned that you would do the Big Story, I'm a fan of the program, so I enjoyed seeing the slides in advance and enjoyed the program tonight. And you know, I've told you before, you know, sometimes you say, well, does the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club want me back again? You're welcome. Anytime you have something that you'd like to present to us, you're always welcome. And you know, I can't thank you enough for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, and actually now, yeah, does anybody have any questions? I am going to mention one thing I noticed that I hadn't noticed before, and that was the letter from Paul Hahn.
Yes.
Okay. There's a very funny episode on Jack Benny when he's worried about whether his contract's going to be renewed, and he's having Paul Hahn for dinner. It's a very, very funny episode. Hahn is actually on the show, but it just caught my eye tonight. Anybody else have any questions or comments? And Joe, I'm going to throw it back to you because Jay Hickerson passed away, and you were certainly familiar with him. You've already written a little tribute to him, and if you would lead the conversation tonight, the discussion about Jay and your relationship with him.
I'm going to take the screen back at one point here, but but I'd like to invite Sean Doherty, who joined the call.
I saw him.
Hello.
Yeah, and Sean actually worked longer with Jay than I did. I was with Jay in the beginning of the convention. That was a marvelous time to be there. I worked on conventions still around 1985, but Sean saw.
I came in around 1994.
Yeah, so you worked a lot longer with him. I'm going to say lots of stuff, okay? But I'd like Sean to talk a little bit about it while I take over the screen again. But I just want to get to a particular page before I do that. Go ahead, Sean.
Yes. Where should I begin?
1994, I guess.
I guess, yeah. I mean, everybody has, you know, the tributes have been pouring in this week, mostly over our Facebook page. And one of the things that everybody has been saying is, you know, I met Jay Hickerson and it changed my life. And we're hearing that over and over and over again. And that was definitely true for me as well. I mean, in 1994, I work in public relations. And back then, before the internet use was widespread, every morning we'd all get a pile of newspapers, and it was your job to read one of them and make sure that nothing relevant to your clients was in it. And that week I happened to be in charge of Newsday, which is a daily newspaper in Queens and Long Island in the New York City area. And in it, there was a little 1-paragraph blurb saying the Friends of Old Time Radio Convention was coming up. And I was like, holy smokes, there's a Friends of Old Time Radio Convention? That's something I think I care about. And I went to it, and I met Jay and all sorts of crazy famous people. And my first night at my first convention, Bob Hastings and Rosemary Rice were seated with me for dinner. So it was just, and Fred Foy stood up and did the Lone Ranger intro, and it was an amazing night. And at that point, I just volunteered for the committee and said, I'm a publicist. I'll do the publicity from now on. Does that make sense? And Jay said, sure, yeah, go right ahead. And I was with him till the end. Every year, trying to get some local news coverage or national news coverage if I could swing it, and try to have more people experience what I experienced, and just finding out about this. And I don't know how many younger people we have on the call tonight, but before the internet, the old time radio hobby was a closed circle. Like, you were either inside it and you knew everything, or you were outside it and you knew nothing. And the Friends of Old Time Radio Convention was my way in. And working with Jay, I mean, by then he'd already been doing the convention for so long that he kind of had a process, and people were in charge of certain things, and he was reluctant to change. But on the other hand, the convention happened every year like clockwork. We never lost money. There was always some new guest or some great presentation, even as you got into the later years when the talent pool was getting thinned out by time. And what I remember about his leadership was that even when he was wrong, there was somebody there to make a decision that everyone respected. So even if he said something you didn't like, you said, well, we're going to do what Jay wants, and then we're going to move forward, and the convention could keep working. And it's not a coincidence that as soon as he decided to retire, that was the end of Friends of Old Time Radio, because it was really his leadership and his force of personality that kept it going.
Yeah, and in the beginning of the conventions, have to remember that there were 3 conventions prior to Jay's conventions, and right. They were okay. The first one did very well. That was 1970, I think, or 1972, and but they didn't have legs, and they had various content and management issues. So when 1976 came along, I was at the first convention meeting of the one that Jay was trying to get started again. And it was from there that I'd only been collecting for about 2 or 3 years. And when Jay started the convention, it's hard to believe, but he had only been collecting about 5 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And the first one was in Meriden, Connecticut, and I think we got about 90 people. And then after the second year, the hotel and all kinds of hotel issues, we moved to Bridgeport. We were there for, I think, 5 years, and we outgrew that. There was no question that we outgrew the Bridgeport Holiday Inn. And that's when we ended up at the Holiday Inn at Newark Airport. So those were very, very big growth times for the convention, and there were basically 2 things that happened. The first thing was that anytime that you could put on a convention like that and have it get a little bit bigger and a little better every year, that's absolutely terrific. But there were a bunch of us who were basically unmanageable free spirits, And Jay would essentially let everybody do what they wanted. But it turned out that there were some implicit guidelines that he never really expressed, that that the convention seemed more cohesive than it actually was. So it was interesting how all that played out. And then the other thing that worked so well for those conventions was that in 1972, Charlie Michelson got up, and people were coming to the conventions from the professional side, thought that there was no such thing really as a hobby, that people were selling programs and making lots of money off of them. So Charlie Michelson got up and said some things about that were not exactly kind, but he was saying, you got to deal with me. He was the syndicator of The Shadow and other shows.
Right.
And then Jackson Beck gets up and just dresses down all of the attendees.
Oh boy.
Yeah. By the end of the convention, Jay and others had convinced Jack that he was wrong. And Jack sent a letter to Jay after that convention that was absolutely critical. And remember, Jack Beck was head of AFTRA for some time. He was an organizer of AFRA.
Yep, he was AFRA member number 2, as he always famously said.
Yes.
And he never forgave the son of a bitch who beat him to the front of the line.
and even he could not put this on AFTRA letterhead, but it was on his letterhead. And he said he did not mind collectors who collected because they loved the programs. And he did not mind people selling recordings of the programs as long as they were just recovering their costs. And somebody's making a drink or something earlier.
Oh, that's probably me. I'm stirring the fire.
Why?
Sorry.
Where are you now?
I'm in Groton, Connecticut.
How fitting. Not far from the first conventions.
That's right. It's true, actually. I'm here
So
in their
that-
ancestral home.
Jay reproduced that letter in Hello Again. And without that letter from Jackson Beck, and how Jackson Beck turned around so quickly to have affection for the hobby, he became, with Jay, the primary person to bring more and more guests to the conventions. And Jack came to the conventions for 20-something years, I think it was, except for the times that he was ill. And Jay cultivated those relationships with the performers in a way that I don't think anybody else could have. I think some of it had to do with Jay was a performer himself, being a musician, so he kind of understood the life and the nature of it. So he did that. I mean, I don't think anybody else could have done that. I don't think anybody else could have held it together and drawn so many volunteers like Jay did for all those years. I mean, when I left the convention around 1985 for family, career, and life in general, I thought for sure the convention only had 3 or 4 more years left, and there it is. It goes all the way to 2011. I mean, that's amazing.
Yep, and it wasn't all him, but it was a lot him.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he built the foundation, and people stood on the shoulders of it.
But he was the one who had to make the calls every year about who was going to do what and what would happen. And what I remember most about it was that by the last several, maybe 3, 4 in there, you could really see that it was wearing on him, right? He was getting into his 70s, and Karen had stopped coming. It was getting to the point where you could really see the struggle that he was having to keep doing it every year, and how things that probably didn't bother him back when you were working on the convention were just we're just wearing on him.
Yeah.
That every little there were a lot of strong personalities involved that didn't know everyone got along with Jay, but they didn't always get along with each other.
Yeah, yeah,
And which was another very special thing about Jay.
yes,
But that, and that every time he had to go in and mediate and, solve a dispute when people were mad at each other about, whether it was appropriate for white actors to be doing Fu Manchu on stage in the 20s or whatever.
yeah,
You could just see it in his eyes that he was starting to say this might not be worth it anymore.
right. But he did hold out till 2011. I mean, that's
right. But all throughout those years, everybody at that convention would come up to him and thank him profusely for doing what he was doing. And people would be talking about, I can't wait till next year. And I can't, Saturday night, people would say, I can't believe it's over already. This is the best thing I do all year. I love it so much. And he would basically be emotionally cajoled into doing another one.
yes.
And,
Yes, there was. I remember even some of the early conventions. You did not want to talk about the next convention until about at least 2 weeks had passed.
Yeah, just let him forget what just happened. Exactly.
Well, in some cases, it was for all of us to do that. We needed a little decompression time. All right, there's a couple of things on the web page that I created for the club that I want to bring to your attention. First thing is his obituary. If you'd like to add to the tribute wall for Jay, that's the link to the obituary. I know one of you already has, one of you on the call. The celebration of life is going to be on November 5th. If you know of collectors in the Orlando area who might be interested in going, that's when that will be. We just got that information this afternoon. There's an interview that Walden Hughes and Larry Gassman did with me, Sean, and Stu Weiss that was on the Yesterday USA network. That is up on archive.org. That has a lot of behind the scenes stuff for the conventions, some very funny stories in there. And in working with Karen this week, it was proposed that we create a Jay Hickerson Memorial Collection over at the Internet Archive, and she was very enthusiastic and thrilled about that. The goal is to have all of the issues ever published of Hello Again, all of the convention programs, as much as of the audio and video that we can find. Some people have the video and have had them for years, but not under this kind of circumstance, and requires some discussions with them about making them available. And Jay's also got a big collection of books, and a lot of them are autographed. She's not exactly certain what to do with them yet. So for people who are asking, can we contribute something? Can we do something? Karen is going to be cataloging some of those books, and there may be an easy way to buy some of those books from her, especially if they've been autographed. Just wait for some of that news to come out. It's still early for that to happen. He's got a massive photograph collection, and somehow we're going to try to get all of that scanned and available online at the archive. It's just an incredible amount of stuff. And the one, for people who did not get Hello Again because it hasn't been published in a while, or did not go to a convention, I've been surprised at how many people mentioned the guide to circulating shows that he had. And as I went through the PDF of it the other day, I was saying, gosh, this is absolutely incredible that he collected this information over 40 years. And sure, there's occasionally inaccuracy here and there, but I mean, he did it over 40 years. It's absolutely incredible. It is now available online for people to download or view at the Internet Archive. So that's one of the best tributes to him, that his work will be preserved there in perpetuity. So if you have any members who are in the Orlando area who might be able to help Karen with some of these some of these things or want to attend, please let them know about this information. I mean, Jay was very good to me. I started working on the convention when I was 19 years old. So it was very good for me to see someone manage such a thing. And then I'm reading his obituary and I'm going, I've known this man for 40 years. I don't know half of this stuff. I mean, it's really was amazing to read some of that.
I mean, the fact that he was the 1957 Connecticut State Tennis Champion, right? And that he was like a nationally ranked, I think it was another racket sport. Was it ping pong or something that he was?
I don't know.
That
See,
it was just, I had absolutely no idea he was that gifted an athlete.
Well,
It's just, that was just something that never came up.
yeah.
All right. Joe, Sean, thank you very much. There are a couple of members who would like to make some comments.
Sure.
George, you have your hand up. Would you like to go?
Yes. First of all, I want to say hi to Sean because I haven't seen him in many, many years. I'm sure you remember me from the children's show panel, and we met at your office in New Jersey a couple of times, but I wanted to
Absolutely,
say hi.
yes.
I'm sorry we're
good to-
meeting under these
So
sad,
good to hear your voice.
but there's also many people who have many memories of Jay that aren't on the call today. Some others are, but I started attending around 1989. I was invited by a movie poster dealer. And before then, as a kid, I collected old-time radio through the library where they'd have the old records and some cassettes. And I was just floored. And it was walking through, it was the closest, I guess, to old radio Hollywood, if there is such a phrase, where the place was lined with stars. It was just incredible. And to focus back on Jay, his genius, I should say, was quarterbacking all of these talents out of all the conventions out there, to the best of my knowledge, except maybe spurred back, of course, but from conventions in general, most of them are profit organizations. And this was a true nonprofit where, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he took a salary or a dime from it for himself. It was meant where he dedicated this time, but he was also able to get some of the people who did panels, people who directed recreations together, and he basically was like the Jack Benny of the thing, coordinating everyone, and people truly respected him. And it was not a respect from power, it was a respect from intelligence, where we truly believed he knew what was best.
At the early conventions, we used to beg him not to pay to go to the convention. And it failed.
That I didn't know. I know all the committee members paid admission, to the best of knowledge.
Jay paid.
And we all paid because we believed in the cause. We believed it was a worthwhile venture. And the other thing that he was able to get, and you mentioned Jackson Beck, the other person that should be mentioned that was very big from the entertainment world was Arthur Anderson.
Oh, Arthur was just absolutely incredible to the convention. What a sweetheart of a man. He's just, in fact, when Arthur helped assemble all of the actors for Let's Pretend in one of the Bridgeport conventions, most of us did not realize how close all of these actors were, but the Let's Pretend cast, especially so, because they were all kids.
That's right.
They grew up together.
And they were close friends through their entire lives.
I think it was Sean that once said, whatever Arthur Anderson wants to do, he can do.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you or somebody else, but
absolutely.
Uh, Arthur, one of the things that also came out that should be pointed out is just as we viewed it as like a loving family, it was also like a reunion for these actors, and they treated the convention where almost like, I don't want to say it was their world, but it was like to them almost like going to a radio Oscars where they were meeting each other and enjoying each other's, and they had, it wasn't like the conventions today where they're more coming to sell an autograph and meet fans. They were truly like a family themselves.
Right. No, the radio actors, most all of them lived in obscurity, and they all shared their obscurity together. And so they were really tight. But I do remember one time, I think this was maybe a newer convention. We were sitting with one of the, I think it was a writer. He was a writer for Dick Tracy, and I don't remember his name, but he said, "I'm so glad I came because I haven't seen most all of these people for 25 years." And he was so happy to be in their presence again.
And I remember that the second to last convention, we were going to finally reunite George Lefferts and Ernest Kenoy, who hadn't seen each other since they were working together back in the 50s. And Ernest got sick at the last minute and couldn't come.
Yeah.
And Lefferts lived in Leonia, New Jersey, so he really should have come every year. I don't know why he didn't.
Yeah.
But,
well, he came to 2011. He was 90. Didn't look a day over 75. Ticked me off to no end.
He did not. He just disappeared. He must have passed by now, but he just kind of moved and no one could find him.
Yeah.
Edgar, I think had some comments you'd like to make.
Thank you, Frank. As I'm looking out over the pictures, I see a number of folks that attended the convention regularly. I found out about Jay and the convention through our own Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club. And I think I first went in like 1994 or 95. And the first table I sat with at the first dinner on Thursday night was Rex Corey. And later we traded tapes, and I invited him to write for my first play that was eventually performed at the convention. And Rex made one last great trip, even though his wife was dying, to come to the convention. And Jay made that possible. As a matter of fact, Arthur Anderson directed that first script, and I became a lifelong friend of Arthur and Alice, who everybody loved for the rest of their lives. In fact, Arthur Anderson had the Arthur Anderson Stock Company, and these were all the actors. He knew all the actors in New York and a lot of them in Los Angeles, and he would call them and say, "I got a part for you." And because they all loved Arthur, if they were free, they would come. And I remember I asked Jay that first year that we were doing it, that Arthur was directing, I said, "I'd like Maureen O'Hara to play the part of the Brooklyn policeman's wife." And I said, "She's living in a castle over in Ireland." And Jay said, "Well, it'd be very expensive to fly her here, but if you can get her to say yes, we'll bring her." So anyway, the sad thing is I read that she was ill in her castle in Ireland, so I didn't follow through. But the sad thing was the week we did the convention, she was in New York, so she might have come down. And for those who don't understand how the annual process evolved,
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, while we see if Edgar is coming back, is there anyone else who has a comment to make?
Well, it's about time someone locked him up.
Yeah. Are we?
He ran out of battery.
I'll just mention that I didn't get to attend the convention until probably 2005 to 2010. And, by then, unfortunately, a lot of the actors were no longer with us. But my one joy was I did get to speak to Shirley Mitchell. And she was, I kind of caught her coming off stage after a recreation, but she was very pleasant and didn't brush me off. And, that's one of my pleasant memories.
Yeah,
This
and
is-
hello,
Oh, go ahead.
this is Derek. I had one of the comedy panels. Like one year, it was really overbooked, and Stuart, we had Molly B coming. He was the contact on her, and she was going to be on the singers panel. And I saw her do some comedy sketches on the Tennessee Ernie Ford reruns, and so I put on the comedy panel as well. Then Stuart tells me, oh, her best girlfriend lives next door to her, and she'd be perfect for your comedy panel. And I said, no, I got too many people. And this was like a week and a half before the convention. I said, I am not going to saddle Jay Hickerson with $1,700 airfare for doing it this late. And it turned out the Molly B's best friend was Betty White, who I could have had on the comedy panel, but this was before she made the comeback with the Snickers commercial and Saturday Night Live and everything else. And I said I'd love to have her, but we're overbooked.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like Edgar's back with us. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment?
Edgar's back. He's
okay.
muted.
Ah,
I have some more thoughts, but let Edgar go first, and then I'll continue.
Just say one other quick story about the committee. One year, I had wanted to have the Mercury Theater, Julius Caesar, the 1938 version based on their Broadway show, to be produced. And I asked Arthur Anderson if he would direct. And I had 3 typed pages of bullet sentences in my briefcase, if necessary, to convince people. And when I presented the idea, Jay said, well, if we do that, that hour-long show, we can't do a Green Hornet. And before I had a chance to pull out all my bullets, Arthur Anderson said, Jay, I really want to do it. And so resistance melted. So Jay was open. Jay would question things, but if people really wanted to do it, Jay would do it. So he supported all of us, and none of us can pay the debt back to Jay. All we can do is remember the many good things he did through the years. Thank you.
thank you.
And this is Derek again, and that's an instance what Sean just said, that Arthur wants to do it, we do it. There were a lot of naysayers and thought that Julius Caesar was just stand out and not be as enticing as the more popular shows. But Arthur wanted to do it, and Edgar was there to help him, and appreciate it. Turned out to be a great production, so I appreciate everybody involved.
For that era, it was one of the best ones. I think it was Simon Jones was there that year, if I'm not mistaken.
Simon Jones played Mark Antony. We
Right.
Literally, everybody wanted to be in it. And we had 2 of the original Mercury actors, Bill Hers and Arthur, played Lucius again, as he had on Broadway for 157 performances. And he sang the same song, Orpheus with his lute, with the same ukulele he played in the 1937 version. So, and when he went up to do his scene, he handed his pages to Simon Jones to hold so he could do his scene with the new Brutus. And it was magical. One great actor holding the pages for another great actor to do the scene. I mean, I was almost in tears. You can see it on the video.
Yeah. And Jay gave us an amazing night like that every year.
That's
Yep.
right. One of the things to keep in mind is when this is before my time, but when the show started around 74, 75, old time radio was basically about 12 or 13 years old. That's in today's time comparable to an era that ended in 2010. So it was great that a lot was fresh then, and this was like, he was like the pioneer of putting things together. One of the sad situations is that his legacy never continued. The exits, I don't want to talk about that because there's a lot of negative there, but it's unfortunate that the situation wasn't such where the legacy continued. And but in another sense, it continues in all of us. As a thumbs up, since you talked about a archive.org and potential FOTR videos, I do have some videos that I personally recorded from the convention somewhere. And I don't know if anybody knows, I think the guy's name was Harold Ziegler, but I know
he's passed on.
I know he's passed on, but maybe his wife or family kept his collection because he recorded religiously every single convention. And that might be something somebody might want to look into, in case from an archival point of view. But I like the idea that archive.org is doing a special legacy for Jay. I'm happy we're all here remembering him fondly. Again, he's touched all our lives and given us an opportunity to be in something very beautiful and precious, life-changing for us and many people.
George, thank you. That kind of sums up things. Do you have any closing comments, Joe or Sean? And I thank you both for Sean and Joe for leading this discussion about Jay tonight.
I'll keep you posted with any news.
All right, thank you. Thank you both very much.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Good night.
All right, Sally, I gotta find you on the screen here.
I am here.
There you are. Okay.
All right.
All right, Sally, are you ready to give us the answers to the quiz?
Yes, I'm gonna pull the poll back up. Okay. So I'll give you about 5 seconds if you were answering the poll or wanted to do that. It is still up. Give you about 5 seconds to put your last answers in and or to find your answer sheets. Remember, have your different colored pen and make sure your name is on your paper. No name papers go right in the trash. No grades. We don't want to start the school year off bad now, do we? We certainly don't. So that's your time, and I'm going to end the poll now. Launching poll. Can you see the poll? Thank you very much. I see thumbs up and heads nodding. Okay. Jack promised us an easy peasy rainbow quiz. Let's see how easy peasy it was. We will just see. Jack, is he still hiding, giggling at me on the screen somewhere? I'm sure. All right. Number 1. A distant relative of the Lone Ranger who also fought crime opened his program with a theme, The Flight of the Bumblebee. Who was it? Was it the ruby-throated hummingbird? The winner of the pollinator world? What? No, it was not. Could have been the beige butterfly. The sad neutral colored butterfly of the pollinator world. What a loser. No. Could it have been the red-headed woodpecker? That could have been tricky like Woody Woodpecker, but no, the correct answer is A, the green hornet. And we're all going to have that stuck in our heads now, so thank you, Jack. Because I don't know about you, but that's been in my head ever since I read that question. Yeah. Number 2. In the comic strip and on radio, Little Beaver was the sidekick of which famous cowboy? My personal favorite is the chartreuse cowpoke. Could have made better clothing choices, perhaps, but nobody else agreed with me. Nobody picked D. Could have been the green gunslinger. Let's hope not, because if you're green, maybe you shouldn't be handling a gun. You know, wait until you get some practice. No? Tough crowd. Okay. Well, somebody went for the blue Bronc Buster. I like that one too. Sounds like a car, frankly, one of those big trucks. But no, the correct answer is Red Rider. A, Red Rider. I think all of the incorrect answers. Jack, did you put them in there just to throw me off and make me have to? Yeah, I bet so. Number 3. Cato drove the powerful automobile of his crime-fighting boss. What was the car called? This is inspiring me to rename my vehicle. Could it have been the copper convertible? No. Could it have been the silver sedan? That one's fairly generic. I mean, I bet half of us have silver sedans. I don't, but it just seems like dime a dozen. They're also silvery. Wow, really got to work on this. Okay, could it have been the Jade Jalopy? That was the one I personally really liked and was really kind of hoping that was going to be the answer. But no, most everyone couldn't be fooled. It was A, Black Beauty. Are we noticing a pattern? Generally, we don't want to answer all of the bubbles in a row because that's not how we answer tests. Okay? It's not how standardized tests works. But I feel like Jack might be throwing us a bone here. Number 4. Bobby Benson and Straight Arrow both rode a Palomino horse. What color were their stallions? Horses. Were they plaid? That would be strange. But sure, someone thought maybe. Were they tickled pink? I stand by my My Little Pony statement. Maybe. Were they dapple gray? Oh, that reminds me of a lullaby that I knew growing up. There's something about dapple gray horses. So I liked that one. Apparently some other people did too. Or were they all golden? If you were noticing the pattern in the earlier questions, perhaps you wanted to just go with A for golden, which is what I did. And A is correct. The horses were golden Palominos. Number 5, a friend to those who had no friend. On radio, this crime solver's first name was a U.S. metropolitan city. I would love to see the show about Glendale Goldie. That sounds like a hoot and a half. I don't know what it would be about, and frankly, it probably wouldn't be allowed on radio, but it sounds fun. Baltimore Brownie sounds like a pretty shady bakery front program. I don't know. We'd probably see that on one of those crime shows. Pittsburgh Pinky. I'm just going to let that one sit. So luckily, most of us weren't fooled. The answer was Boston Blackie, A fine show and a fine city, if I do say so myself. Number 6, Clark Kent's editor at the Daily Planet was who? Terry Turquoise? No, that's just silly. It could have been Harry Lime, though. I really liked that one. Then I started thinking about Harry Limes, and then it just got gross. Barry Black and Blue? No, but you almost had me there, Jack. Almost lost it. It was Perry White. D. Jack was throwing us off now. Moving into the D's. Let's see if we've started a new pattern or not. Number 7, Smile and Ed's Kids Show on Saturday mornings, running from 1944 to 53, was subtitled what? I don't know if I would have watched this show with this subtitle. I'm just saying. I don't know, the luster silver team. I couldn't stop thinking that it was the hair cream somehow that I was gonna trip over that one in my mouth. Duster Tan Group. Well, who was their sponsor? A broom? Maybe. Muster Maroon Kids. That just sounds wrong, but I like the alliteration here. But no, it was D, the Buster Brown Gang. So I'm going to have to be reminded on who was Buster Brown, though I've heard Buster Brown through my life. But still, if it had been the Duster Tan Group, Luster Silver Team, or Muster Maroon Kids, I don't know. Even if I'd seen the Buster Brown Gang as a subtitle, that's, they really should have worked on that. Really should have worked on that, in my opinion. Since I have the mic, I get to say anything I want. Okay, number 8. Played by Frank Lovejoy, this crime fighter was a radio copycat of the Green Hornet. Even his name was similar. Dennis, I know this one, it will always haunt. Always haunt. It unfortunately was not the fuchsia flycatcher. Too bad. That sounds really dramatic. The fuchsia flycatcher. Walking around with like a fly swatter. Or, arms that were like Venus flytraps. The possibilities are endless. The white wasp. We're not going to touch that one. The maroon moth. Sounds scarier than the beige butterfly. So a win for moths, even though they're not as pollinating. But no, the correct answer is another D, the blue beetle. The blue beetle. Number 9, a popular soap opera, Our Gal Sunday, aired for nearly 20 years. And what was its country western theme song? I'm pretty sure, Jack, that these places are all probably actual locations from radio shows. I don't know. I would need some verification, but they all sound like it. Can't you just hear it now? And now we head over to the Silver Stream Gorge. No? Maybe we're at the Emerald Rim Canyon, and that's where they're, who knows, but they're probably there. Or the Turquoise Mountain Trail, my personal favorite. I do like that one. Sounds very pretty and peaceful. But no, again, I'm noticing a pattern. Who else is noticing a pattern? Oh, good job. I love that you're seeing the patterns. Nice work, everyone. It is Red River Valley. Maybe you've had that song stuck in your head since we've been doing the quiz. No? Maybe. Last one. I know you're all thrilled. Orson Welles was the star of a BBC crime drama in the early 50s that Mutual also aired in the United States. What was it called? The Amber Archives. What does Amber keep in her archives, I ask? We'll never know. The Violet Vault, full of flowers. The Orange Observatory, where I keep all of my oranges, obviously. But no, Jack, let us keep the pattern. And the answer is D, the Black Museum, which is a really good show. I actually really like that one. So, there you have it. The very fun and rainbow easy peasy quiz of August. Thank you to Jack. I'm going to stop sharing. You did get me a little bit, tripped me up, made me giggle. That was a lot of fun. So there you go. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Sally. Thank you very much. Entertaining as always. Thank you, Jack. It's the first time I've gotten all 10 right in the Jack French quiz, so it was fun. All right, now, I guess what we're going to do next, if I can find, there it is, find the button. We're going to stop recording.